Hey guys, welcome to another episode of MMA Power Talk and Sport Karate Illustrated over at the Dojine. This is Grandmaster Jerry Fast Fontanez, and this time we're going all the way to Mid-America. That's right, via Texas, where his instructors are from. But this gentleman here, not only was he a top point karate fighter, but he comes from a family of some incredible fighters from the junior system all the way to National Karate and a whole bunch of other places, Diamond National included, but we'll hear it from the horse's mouth. Not only was he a top point fighter, but in addition to that, he became a top kickboxer, one of the few people who actually was able to transition the proper way with some phenomenal kicks and punches. Without any further ado, all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota, I believe, at least St. Paul area, Master John Longstreet. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm here, Jerry. How are you?
I'm doing phenomenal. Super good and getting better, as somebody taught me. How's everything going with you, sir?
It's going very well up here. It's a beautiful place up here.
Yep. Okay, so listen, in the tradition of Sport Karate Illustrated, as we call it here, we want to know in the beginning, what was your motivation, inspiration, or desperation to join martial arts? I will put myself on mute, so if you don't hear me, I'm still there, but I just want to make sure that you have the mic. Take it away, sir.
Sure. Okay, thank you. It's a very simple story. My brother always wanted to take martial arts, and we grew up in a small town in Missouri that it was never offered. We moved to Minneapolis when I was 14 and he was 13, and on the way to a Twins baseball game, we drove by a karate school that said opening soon. Well, we went to the Twins game, and on the way back, we drove by that same school, and it said now open. So we stopped in. And that was the Junior Institute had just opened with John Worley and Gary Hestelow in 1973, I believe. And I was literally, as they tell the story, the first person to ever even walk in the door of the karate school. And I was their first student. So my main...
What a story. Wait, let me just interject, because I didn't know that, and I fancy myself as a historian. So now you guys, you heard it first here. Incredible. The first student in what was Junior Institute of Mid-America, if I remember correctly, and I think the Hestelows and the Worley, Hestelow and Worley came from Texas. Is that correct?
Yeah, John Worley and Gary Hestelow came from Texas. They went to Washington, D.C. first and taught out there for a while, and then they decided to open up on their own, and so they moved to Minnesota and opened a school and then opened more schools. And then after that, Larry Carnahan, Pat Worley, and Gordon Franks came up to join them.
Incredible. Okay, now this is the question. Now, your brother wanted to do martial arts. What do you know? What motivated him? Only because some Asian people sometimes get credit for that.
He watched the Kung Fu series. He thought it was cool. I thought it looked kind of phony. I didn't think it looked very good. And my younger brother at that time was a little bigger than I was, and my older brother was bigger than I was. And I didn't want to get a situation where they're both able to beat me up. And so I took it because of my brothers doing it. And at first, I actually didn't like it that much. There was too much memorization, too much rules, too many things you had to do to be good at it. And that evolved over time until I entered a tournament, and I kicked a guy in the head and got a point for it and got a trophy at the end of it. And I thought that was really neat. You don't get in trouble for hitting people. And that was a good time.
I would have to concur, because if it wasn't for karate, I would have been in jail.
Yes.
All right, so now, just to get historical facts together, you're coming from a legendary operation that has gone throughout the years through different stages, obviously, but we're looking at 1973. When was approximately when you first started competing?
I started, I think, that probably that year in some point tournaments. We drove to a tournament in Iowa. It was the first one I'd actually competed in. I competed as a junior because I was 13, and that was actually the last tournament I competed in as a junior. Then after that, I started competing as an adult. And we went to every tournament that we could find in the Midwest. The upper Midwest at that time, didn't have very many. There's probably 4 or 5 a year, and which is, by Texas, California, or East Coast standards, not very many. And so we traveled, like I traveled down to Kansas, Roger Carpenter's tournaments all over the Midwest so I could get some experience.
Wow. Okay, so now, for whatever's worth, while you're getting experience, I'm sure you're also feeling pretty proud because your instructors, which you just mentioned, at least 5 legends there back to back to back, coming from, the forefathers of quite a few things, including safety equipment and even tournament competition at different levels and even teams. How did you feel? And mention some of those events that you were able to watch, not only as a competitor, but when you seen your instructors doing that thing.
Well, I was very fortunate to have them, and it was just like all the stars fell in alignment for me with these things. And one of the things of having, people like John Worley and Larry Carnahan and Gordon Franks and Pat Worley around you is you remained very humble. They were all very good fighters in their own right, and so I thought everybody in the world fought like them. I didn't realize how good they were until I started traveling more. And then I realized, I could actually maybe, as I got older, do a little bit better in the sport. But having to work out with Pat Worley and Larry Carnahan and Gordon it was a very humbling experience for a teenager. It, as I always say, it was like playing a game of tag, and I was always it.
That's hilarious because I didn't get an opportunity coming from New York City since, as we just mentioned in the last interview with Mr. Marty Knight, New York was pretty much non-existent when it came to the rest of the country until years after. But I understand that Mr. Worley was doing techniques, Pat Worley in particular, that years after became push kicks or what have you, and those techniques were being developed coming from Texas and, like you said, Washington, D.C., but revolutionizing the industry. So I would have to assume that people like myself or Mafia Holloway and other guys that came up in my era probably learned those techniques, unbeknownst to us, from people who actually created them, like your guys, like them.
Yeah, they were very innovative, and they were very good at if you were going to be good at something, it encouraged me to reach out and try different things. There was a tournament in Baltimore where Pat Worley actually drove with me so I could get to it. Took the time to do that and get me out there and let me compete in this tournament, which is awfully nice of him to do. And again, it was a very close relationship with everybody, and everybody tried to make everybody else better. The things, Pat Worley was left-legged, and Larry Carnahan was right-legged. And so to go from fighting one to the other was very confusing sometimes because you'd look, okay, now what leg is he going to hit me with? And then Pat would kick you in the head, and you'd go, okay, now I remember it's left leg. And then Larry would side kick you in the body, knock you across the room, and you'd remember, okay, that's Larry's right leg that kicks. And I ended up fighting right leg in front of a situation where I broke my toes on my left foot. And I used to always fight left leg in front, but I had to change. And since that time of changing, I was about 15 or 16, I stayed in right leg in front.
Well, let me just say this. There's a common denominator that you may or may not realize, but the majority of the people who are able to transcend to top competitors, most of them, the ones who were in the military, that is, started fighting black belt, or I should say adults, when they were teenagers. They were teenagers, which obviously, the kid over there in Texas, Mr. Ray McCallum, I'm sure you're a very good friend of yours. In addition to that, a bunch of people, But let's talk about when it was time for you to transcend from a junior / near adult or fighting an adult division to actually becoming competitive, and maybe mention some of those names. Because if I remember correctly, there was a photo of you, Keith Vitale, with Mike Genova, and your guys were...
Dan Anderson, I think, was in there, too.
Well, the photo I'm talking about is not the Diamond Nationals. It's the one that was Century's uniforms, like when Gary Huston went down to Century. Yeah, let me tell you something. That was what I visualized, and eventually I was able to, get that uniform. And let's just talk about that era of when Karate Illustrated and professional karate, and just take it away. Give us some history. Go from the late 70s to the early 80s. Okay.
One of the things that was unique about that time is we were fortunate, the sport, to have guys like Joe Corley and John Worley and some other people on the East Coast and I can't think of their names now, from San Jose. They did tournaments out there. Ernie Reyes had tournaments, and they took a lot of risk to put on tournaments so we could shine. And I don't know that a lot of competitors realize that, the financial risk that they took to do this. And that was neat that we could travel and go around the country and fight. And literally, to me, it was just like a big summer party all the time. It was just go somewhere and you fight and then go do it again with someone else. And it's a lot of times with the same people, though. You'd have a regional aspect if we'd go to Atlanta. A lot of people from Atlanta were there, but you'd still find like Raymond was there and Steve Anderson. Keith Vitale obviously was around. And those experiences were just wonderful. And most of us got along with each other pretty well. And the ones who didn't have made amends. It's funny on these reunions they go to how well they get along now. I have to kind of remind them they didn't always get along so well. And, that this is a wonderful part of this. But as far as transitioning from the junior part and stuff, like I said, I only fought in one junior tournament. And I took adult classes. I don't know if they even had kids classes when I was training. And we just fought adults. And, since I was the first student, there were no brown belts or blue belts or green belts for me to fight coming up through the ranks. It was just me, and then the gap was, Gordon Franks or Pat Worley or John Worley or Larry Carnahan. And that's a large gap for a green belt to look at. And you didn't, because I never fought a brown belt until I actually entered brown belt divisions. There was none in our school. I was the first student. I was the first brown belt. And so I lacked that, and in some ways it was a disadvantage because a lot of times they get awfully discouraged, but in other ways it was an advantage because I had very, very good people teaching me and leading me and showing me examples of, this is how you can be. If you want to get good at this, you need to do these things, you need to work hard, but you can get good at this. And I always felt fortunate for that, that I had those kinds of people around me.
Well, they say it takes a village, right, to grow a child, and that's what you're at. You're surrounded by pioneers and legends, and we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And what's interesting is that you were in an environment where you didn't even realize, like you said, until you get a chance to compare it to, that you was with the cream of the crop there, which is so cool. The opposite is not too cool when you think you're with the cream of the crop and you're on the other side.
We'd run into some of those guys now and then that did, and we were pretty, I think, gentle with them most of the time, but it was interesting. There's a lot of things that happened, like when I met Raymond McCallum, I met him in Dallas at a tournament, and they had asked for, they had a number of 17, I think the division had 17 people in it, and they needed 2 volunteers to fight. And so Raymond stepped forward, nobody else stepped forward, so I stepped forward. And so he and I fought, and that was the first time I ever met him, and we really beat each other up pretty good, and he won the fight. And then afterwards, he was yelling about he couldn't find his tape, his adhesive tape anywhere. And I found it underneath the bag for him and said, here. And then that started our friendship years ago, just by me finding a roll of tape and being able to fight him. And we've been friends since then. So
that's
those sort of
the
things.
whole thing. We just spoke about that. Those are frenemies, right? Even though you were friends inside that ring, I think that it might have been a little dangerous.
Yeah, we tried to kill each other. We had respect for each other. That it was it. If you ever interview him or talk to him, ask him about the win-win situation, and I'll be interested to see what he says about that. But there's a lot of fun in doing that sort of stuff and competing with that kind of a caliber. I'd never seen anybody that electric on stage before in a fighting atmosphere. And you could go to a tournament with Raymond in it, and even if he didn't win the tournament, everybody was still talking about him after the tournament.
Well, he was one of the few people that I literally, in the past, interviewed not once but twice. It was a few years back, and we'll do it again. But and the reason is because coming from New York, I had an opportunity not to see too many people, but Ray McCallum fought in Harlem, USA, in the early 80s. That's right, in the early 80s. And I was like, whoa, what the heck's going on here? And obviously I knew his career because before that I saw him fight. He didn't win this time, but it was against, I believe it was John Moncayo might have been a kick organization event, and that was over at Madison Square Garden, the South Forum, where he lost in the first round. I was kind of upset. And it was interesting because a few years after that, I had a chance to see him in Harlem, USA, competing, from Texas. And it was mind-boggling and phenomenal. We developed a pretty good relationship in recent years, and absolutely. Okay, how about let's ask? I'm going to ask you about a specific event because recently one of the gentlemen that you competed against, Jesse Floyd, we just did his power talk about 2 weeks ago, and my. I guess you could call him one of my mentors / best friends of all time because I just recently came back from Atlanta. Mr. Joe Corley was the center referee. And I think that was the Diamond Nationals, and you fought against Robert Harris after that. One of the few videos that we do see you fighting point karate back-to-back in some incredible technique. Let's talk about that win.
Well, the Diamond Nationals, when they came out, I think the first year it was, 78 or 77 or 79, somewhere around that. And I was a black belt at the time, and I got to the finals that first time, and then I ended up fighting, I think, Keith Black-Alley, and he beat me. And once again, I'd seen talent in Keith's strength. You could hit him with something, but you'd never hit him with it again. And so then 79 or 80 came around, and I lost like the fight before the finals or in the finals or something every year, and I never won that tournament. And so it was very frustrating. One year I'd had a broken arm and couldn't fight, and it was frustrating because I wanted to win that tournament because obviously it's in my own backyard and everybody here knew me. So in 1982, that was the year that I decided, I've got a little bit better at some things and paid more attention to some stuff, and was fortunate enough to do well in the daytime eliminations and made it to the finals and fought Jesse. And people don't realize just how good he was, and how fast he was. And I was a little bit bigger than him, and because of that, I was able to, win the fight. And then Robert and I were friends and fought, several times before that. And again, a great fight. And the thing that most people came back, they said it looked like two karate guys fighting. It didn't, it looked like they were actually in a fight. It didn't look like just a typical point fight, which I liked. That it was a little more aggressive. So that was a big win for me. And that same year I won the Battle of Atlanta and a few other national ones. And it was fun to do. And I was very fortunate to be in that position to be able to win, and had great friends around me while that was happening.
Okay, so now if I remember correctly, then shortly after that, yourself, along with even Robert Harris, not too far after you, and if I remember correctly, you also had a classmate named Terry Nobloom, something within those lines, who was representing. Yeah. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah. So if we could just talk about two things. Mr. Nobloom, because it seems like you guys were holding the fort for Minnesota, I should say Mid-America, as a competitor. In addition to that, there was a transition from what was point karate to full contact, or as today known as kickboxing. So if you could talk about those two things, it would be wonderful.
Sure. Terry was a tremendous athlete, and he kicked harder than anybody I ever worked out with or fought. I mean, he could kick a hole in a wall. And his biggest asset was his leg strength. His conditioning was phenomenal. He did the full contact too. Didn't have as much luck with it as I did, but still was a tremendous sparring partner. And a great friend to travel with. He was just a fun time. And the sport is filled with people who maybe didn't get the right break or the opportunity to maybe win a title or win a fight. It has nothing to do if they didn't have the talent or didn't deserve it. Things just maybe didn't fall their way for it. But there's some tremendous people out there that I competed with. I mean, I get asked the question of who was the hardest fight, and they were all hard. There was no easy ones. These guys are serious martial artists, and they were all very good at what they did. What was the other question? You asked me the other question about.
Yeah, so basically, so I got that answer. So Terry Nobloom was a horse. He could kick you, right through you, which is pretty incredible. It's interesting because remember, coming from New York City, and at this time, as most of you guys who are listening know, New York was not being represented on the national circuit whatsoever. It had to be Jumping Joe Hayes, many years before that we even had any New Yorkers. But the closest thing to that was a gentleman that was on that lineup quite often without even wearing a belt, and his name was Kicking Kelly from Connecticut, who ended up going to Massachusetts, and that was Larry Kelly. So he was the closest thing that we got a chance.
Yeah, Larry was Well, he's in politics right now. I don't know if you knew that, but he's
yeah.
in politics. Yeah, and he was always kind of a loner, but he was friendly. I got along well, but he always had his own, went to his own drummer. He always did his own thing with that, which I kind of respected too. That, you know, he tried to do a lot for the sport to get the fighters to huddle together and group up and do things. So he had a tremendous influence that way. And yet his kicks he was very good at kicking. And it was, like I said, if you put a lot of people in a room together with me and working out like Norblum or Larry Kelly and said, okay, go kick that bag, you wouldn't think that I would be the better fighter of the three. You know, you look at them and they have tremendous physical potential and, you know, kicks and stuff. It was just how they could kick and do that. I had a hard time kicking people in the head. They could do it at ease. So, I mean, a tremendous amount of respect for them. There's a lot of people who came out of the East Coast, and I think a lot of it with them is they didn't have the ability maybe to travel as much. And if you don't travel a lot and on the circuit, they don't get to see you. It's hard to win a lot of point fights. It's almost as though you earn it after a period of time of paying your dues. And I know there was a lot of that people would get frustrated with. They'd go from the East Coast maybe to the West Coast and not do well and then not go back again. But you have to go back several times so the judges at least know you and recognize you before you start winning anything big. And I think that's true in a lot of sports. There was a thing in pro football the other day where one of the quarterbacks didn't get a call because the referee said you haven't been around here long enough, you know, to deserve that call.
Imagine that. Well, politics are in everything, but let me say this. John Longstreet, looking at him, seemed like either he had great genes or he was a phenomenal cross trainer because your upper body, couldn't see your legs, was freaking like a bodybuilder just about, or at least a gymnast.
Yep. I did a lot of weightlifting and upper body stuff, and I realized then if you were strong, that was obviously you had an advantage. But when I could take a lot of guys in the ring and they were trying to push me and I could push them back and move them back, that was always an advantage. I could do a lot of pull-ups and push-ups, and I never really got tired during a fight of it. That was an advantage I had. As I always tried to be in as best shape as I could, so I didn't have to worry about my endurance. My strength, I'm probably up there at the higher end of the strength scale because we did a lot of. John Worley and I used to lift weights, and he would get out there and motivate me to lift weights, and we lifted weights and did a lot of push-ups and pull-ups and dips, and how many weights you can lift in a minute, and all sorts of games he'd come up with to keep you motivated, and keep it fresh, and keep it fun.
I think today they call that cross-training.
Yeah, you're right. They do. I had a guy ask me the other day about that, and he said the same thing. And then my diet, I said, I ate fruits and vegetables and just, lean meat. And then the guy said, well, that's what we call now a paleo diet. I said, well, I was doing paleo before it was popular then.
And, I just got off the phone again with Marty Knight, who obviously is a descendant of both Kay Vitale and, Mike Genever and his classmates with the Joyce Flets, and I'm sure you know better than me. But what was interesting is that athletes is what you had to be in order for you to become even a contender back then, because bottom line was that since there was less competition in terms of amount of events, the quality of the competitors was at an all-time high. Now, I believe, being a fan of sport karate, and there's been a few arguments to find out who's the biggest sport karate fan, and I think I am still, and I'll argue with anybody on that. But
okay.
and I didn't get an opportunity to go to a lot of the events until years after, but reading Karate Illustrated and Official Karate and visualizing myself being there, I can remember almost techniques to the date, the covers of the magazines, and so on and so forth. And that was one of the things that was interesting, because what you did with your flying sidekick was you had the highest bottom chamber that I've ever saw in my life. And that's crazy because the purpose of the chamber in the bottom was to cover the groin area. How the heck did you get your leg up so high from the bottom?
Fear. When I was, gotta remember, when I started fighting, I was only 13, and I started fighting adults and fighting John Worley and the rest of them. Your fear is a big motivation in your reaction time, and that was right when pads started coming out. So sometimes we didn't wear all the pads. And I tell you, a lot of my stuff, my fighting, one of the things I was known for is not getting hit a lot, having good distance, having the opponent just miss you. And that was just surely out of fear as a teenager, learning, okay, if I get hit by that, that's going to really hurt. And I got very good at learning just how long people's arms and legs were and just being able to avoid it. And the side kick and all of my strikes merely came from just, fear. I have to hit him harder because he's bigger than I am and stronger. And so I have to hit it hard. If I don't hit it hard, it's just going to knock me over and he's going to hit me. And
but that's avoiding pain. We do things to gain pleasure or avoid pain or a combination of the both, and that was wonderful. Okay, so the next question was in this, there was a transition. You went from what was point karate to something a little more different, similar but different. Being at the time PK kickboxing, I think they called it. As today, at full contact, today they call it kickboxing. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, my transition to that wasn't really that drastic because I was already doing sparring work with Larry Carnahan, Gordon Franks, and Pat Worley, and they were world rated. Gordon was a world champion. Larry and Pat were 1 or 2 rated in the world in full contact. And so I did sparring with them. And so for my transition, I actually probably did more full contact work than I did point work, sparring with anyone. And so for me to transition from one to the other actually was pretty simple. It was harder sometimes I'd go to a point tournament and not just, when the referee would say stop, or when you get in a clinch, not just keep hitting them. The full contact was a little simpler because I was probably fighting 20 or 30 rounds a week with them, doing the full contact. And about the only time I point fought would be on our Friday afternoon meetings with some of the staff. And I couldn't go that hard with them.
That's pretty funny, but it's consistent because, you see, in my crazy mind, to me, it's all point karate. I want to hit you without getting hit, so it's a matter of just what the rules are. You just keep moving. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, with mine, that's why I used to explain to people. I said that's what the referee is for, is to get you to stop. And if you don't have to stop. I mean, he has sometimes have to throw his body in there. Don't stop every time, and people get a kick out of that. But I tell them that that I'm going to keep hitting you sometimes until the referee gets between me and you, and take the warning. But it was kind of fun to do that way.
Well, I laugh because, and again, this is my belief. I could be 100% wrong, which I often am. So ask my wife, of course. My belief is that if they're doing today sport karate and point karate, if that's what that's called, which is fine. I don't want to be an old man just player hating the new generation. So I came up with this idea a few years back, and I called it sniper fighting. I said, you know what? Those guys that saw fighting, they look like snipers because they do one technique and it would hit you, sometimes combinations, hit you to the body and the head, and they were sharp, precise, and on point. Really dangerous is my point. So I came up with this idea, and I started actually I put together a curriculum of sparring that I had for my schools. And then I started teaching other people how to teach that, because I think one of the biggest challenges is that when the blind leads the blind, everyone bumps into each other, and complains. Yeah. So I started teaching the instructors how to learn at the time how to do real sport karate, as I called it. Then I thought about it, I'm saying, wait, if I call it real sport karate, not that I really care half the time, but in general, I don't want to really offend people. If I call it real sport karate, that means these guys are doing a fake one. I said, you know what, leave that alone, and I call it sniper fighting, because to me, you and the 300 people that I am interviewing you for is this. If I went to war and I had a chance to only take 300 people to be on my army, like the movie, Mr. John Longstreet, even though you and I never officially met, I believe this is the first conversation we've ever had, and even I saw you quite a few times, especially working on the Diamond Nationals, you would be on my team. And that's what this is about.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
is my sincere pleasure and just the honest truth. When it's all said and done, I believe that in the martial arts world, just like any other industry, you have people who have quality, but a lot of times their marketing is not that good. You got people with great marketing, and a lot of times their product or services renderings are not that good. And I've been fortunate enough throughout the years to reinvent myself a few times, and some people know who I am, some people don't, but some of them, either they wore my uniforms or maybe influenced by some of the other things that I did. I found a way to become what would be considered relevant years after. As an example, this year, I went to the Battle of Atlanta, not as a competitor, just as some old fat guy that used to do things. And I got interviewed not once but twice by the so-called authorities that be when it comes to media in sport karate, if that makes any sense, if that's even possible. But they walked by at least 10 to 15 people that they should have been interviewing before me, because I was their fans. And I said, you know what? Maybe these people don't know who they are. So there's a generation gap in the industry, but if there's a way to interconnect some of these generations on specific facts, then by golly, maybe that'll help people to recognize and appreciate that there were people before them. And that's what this is all about.
Well, yeah,
connecting
that helps quite a bit, yeah. The history of things and how we I have questions all the time, like how did we end up where we're at with this stuff? And, like before me, the full contact stuff, with Jeff Smith and Bill Wallace. And,
by the way, them two are being interviewed next week.
Yeah, Jeff, actually, I spent some time when I was 16. A friend of mine got into a Fiat and drove out to Washington, D.C. to train with Jeff Smith, and that's when Larry was still there, too. And we slept on a karate school floor for a month. And we stayed out we went out for the bicentennial that year, 1976, and Jeff was absolutely wonderful to us, that he took us around and trained with us and did all sorts of stuff. And that was actually one of the highlights of my karate training, was getting to know him. And his friendship has been just invaluable to me over the years. He helped introduce me to a lot of the Europeans, and which got me going over there and making friendships over there. So he's a tremendous martial artist. And in person, I mean, he just does a lot of good things for people.
Well, you know what? For those of you who might know Mr. Jeff, the D.C. Bomber Smith, who's really from Texas, you figure that one out.
Yeah.
D.C. Bomber from Texas. This gentleman, not only when it comes to the kicking and punching attributes of martial arts, has he been a top point fighter and a kickboxer for original light heavyweight kickboxing PK champion, but in addition to that, when it comes to martial arts principles of business, I believe he was one of the people who started the Black Belt Club and even the Master Club, and this very day continues to influence, leading from the front, Mr. Smith, that is. So, yes, we're talking about you, Mr. Jeff Smith. I'll get you in the next few days. This gentleman has been, I invented some uniforms years ago called rec suits, real easy kicking suits. I actually made some suits for National Karate and a bunch of people, but the thing that, since we're talking about Mr. Smith, in 1997, Mr. Jeff Smith was the first person to buy a rec suit. As a supporter, he still has it, by the way, and it fits him because, he's always in good shape. So here we are again, extended family members in the martial arts. Doesn't matter we're in New York, New Jersey, or anywhere part of the world. Sometimes there's people that know more about you from other countries than the students that train with you today.
Yes.
And that's some of the stuff that I want to, if anything. My goal is to hopefully inspire about another 100 people or so who know the difference. In other words, they've been there, done that, or at least have access to speaking to some of those people who've done it. And then maybe with 100 people doing what I'm doing, we'll get about 10% of the stories that people should be hearing. That's my goal.
There's a lot of them out there that, just that never got told, or the influence that people had on stuff. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in the creation of a sport, with the full contact stuff, and was able to take advantage of it in things. And that's where you're right with the fighters nowadays, and I think a lot of them do that, knowing where all this stuff started and came from. And, some of these guys, I can't think of the guy's name, does a lot of point fighting and did some full contact
We got Raymond Daniels as the top one right now. Raymond Daniels representing.
Yeah. I mean, they're tremendous athletes, and the rules, that they have now. The people always complain about that they don't fight rather than this, but that's what the rules dictate. And they're tremendous athletes, and so I don't think anybody should take away from the athletic ability and the things that they're doing. It's just that's what the rules say on how you win the fight. And people complained back when we first started wearing safety equipment because it took away from the sport of it. And there was a story when I first started putting on safety equipment. They could, if you were at a tournament, they could actually, if the guy you were fighting did not want you to wear it, he could request you take it off. And so the guy I was fighting requested that I took it off. And so I took it off, and I waited for him to move, and as soon as he moved, I just defensively punched him in the face as hard as I could. And then he got up, and we went for another point. I got a warning for it, and I hit him again with it. And the second time he got up, he turned and looked at me, and he said, "You can put those pads back on if you want." And so, true story, he did.
Jeff Smith. Yes. Sorry, yes.
The guy years later was at one of my full contact fights and came up to me and was so excited to see me, and I remembered him. And so it was good to see him later on. What were you going to say about Jeff?
Well, again, Mr. Smith at the Long Beach Internationals can't allow the top fighters to put the sparring equipment because, of course, Master reinvented it, and they didn't want to wear them. And here he pops up again as one of the reasons why the sport and the arts have changed because of his influence, firsthand or vicariously.
Yeah. Some of those guys
Same thing.
Influence on it. Yeah.
And I think in Middle might have been, it's interesting, because when I first saw guys like Scorpion Barrage and also, I believe you guys were the first ones that were wearing the headgear. And we're like, what the hell are they wearing the headgear for? In the meantime, it's the rule of thumb, and it's been the rule for well over 20 years now. Yeah,
we did the headgear because, again, it's one of the things like with teenage boys, which I always compare teenage boys to sometimes the dumbest animal in the world. They don't think they can get hurt, but they can get hurt. And I'm a big proponent with children and stuff of wearing safety equipment. Obviously, you pad them up. Now all these studies that they're doing on brain injuries, getting hit in the head and that, and just how bad it is for you. I think the more safety equipment you can put on, the better off you are.
Well, I would concur. And again, I visualize, I can see you right now going from what was a safety chop headgear, jewelry predecessor, to what would be a top 10 headgear.
Yeah.
Which became the rule of thumb for, yes.
Well, the top 10 equipment, that was sort of interesting because it was so soft. And, I mean, I don't know, you get tired hitting each other because you couldn't hurt each other. And it was great from that aspect, but there were no early knockouts and things, it was hard to knock somebody out in the top 10 equipment, and so you had to be prepared if you had a 5-round fight that it was going to go 5 rounds. It was not going to end early.
Not too many people have mentioned this gentleman, and I'm going to give him credit with his due because, and you may not know this, originally from Brooklyn, New York, Mr. Mike Anderson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Born in Brooklyn, New York.
The
same way Mr. Pat Johnson was born in Buffalo, New York, which that one you might have known. I got to find the New Yorkers. He literally was the one. Yes.
Yeah. Well, he literally created the full contact movement.
There you go. All right, I'm gonna shut up and you continue with that.
Well, that was one of the things on ABC that they had, as I remember it. The show they had with Jeff Smith and Bill Wallace and Joe Louis. I think it was Isaiah Duenas won that Howard Jackson lost.
Exactly.
That division.
And actually, the person Duenas won, but he lost to a guy named Ramon Smith from a junior taekwondo over in Dominican Republic.
Yes, and that was the beginning of an amazing chapter in this sport, and it just took a few people to take some risk, and he did, and the stuff he did in Europe was also quite impressive, too. He was able to get the French and the English and the Germans and the Italians in a room together to get along about something. And
well, let me give you a little history behind that, too, which I know you know, and I'm just saying this for the general public, guys. what Mr. Anderson, Mike Anderson, did was not only was he the first promoter of the PK championships, I believe, rest in peace, Joe Lewis, his student, private lesson student, was the gentleman, I think Tony, whatever his last name, Solitors, whatever. He was the one that was the producer over ABCs. But what Mr. Anderson did, not only did he have the top 10 nationals, the original ones, I think him and Fred Wren, they were all from the same area. Again, Tex Kwando guys, this is Tex Kwando and Allenstein Jr. guys. You know, that's what it comes down to, all to Minnesota. These are descendants of the same person, with equipment and what have you. So they turn around, or he turns around and goes and starts the top 10 equipment company, but then he started Waco along with George Buckner in Germany, and was able to get the United States as part of the rest of the world or vice versa, and there was competition. So whether it was Waco, top 10 tournaments, and or the top 10 equipment line, uniform line, clothing line, and the PKA, only one person was there in the beginning of all of them, and that was Mr. Mike Anderson.
Yeah, and he also started that magazine.
Fighter magazine and a whole bunch of other magazines. Incredible.
He told me a story, too, that he would just make up a bunch of Oriental names, as though he had 12 different writers working for the magazine, but it was just him.
Well, there's a constant denominator of people with A through Z, not just ADD, because there's a lot more letters dubbed than that. Mr. Anderson, again, now maybe you understand why his energy level was so high, because he's really a New Yorker. And he has, I'm not sure what kind of Native American blood, but he had that too. That's the reason. Great guy. Yeah. International. He
was always hyper. He never sat still very long.
Hey, listen, sir, I want to be respectful of your time because we're already at slightly over the 45 minute mark, and I know time integrity is very important. But just for you, to make sure that you're happy with what is that you're sharing, I'll turn myself off if you want to give any credit or So I do have one thing to request from you, if it's possible. Would it be possible sometime in the future to continue this conversation? Because I think we're just starting at the tip of the iceberg over here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. It's fun to talk to somebody who has history of the sport. I've spent a lot of time educating people about the sport. But if I like it when people have a history of it, because that way we can talk about it. It's more.
Well, to make life easier for someone like you, Dojine.com / in this case it'll say Longstreet to listen to this particular one. I'll take some photos and some videos, and if you want to put any additional contact information, you can send it to me. But I'll put together what would be, and I'm doing this for everybody, the Vitali one was pretty cool, a contact page giving credit where it's due. But in addition to that, hey, I have guys here that have been interviewed already that most people have no idea who they are. And by George, I'm going to get an opportunity to spread that word. And I shouldn't say guys. The women also who represented.
There's a lot of them out there.
Holy smoke. Some of them were pretty embarrassing. When Linda Dunley beat me in basketball, and it cost me my number one ranking in 1988. I finished number 3 because I have blisters in my feet after she beat me the night before playing basketball. But that's I guess I told the story.
I don't think you're the only guy she's embarrassed in her lifetime.
You know what? And I wouldn't embarrass her to ask her how old she is, because I think she's been around longer than just about everybody, and she looks freaking exactly the same. I don't get it.
She does. She really does. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to shut up, and I want you to, if you don't mind, if you could bring it around full circle for the time being. If you want to talk about present and future, and or whatever you choose to, or give credit where it's due if you want to, and it's on you, Mr. Longstreet.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. I'd just like to thank everybody for the participation in this and listening to it. Jerry is going out of his way to do this. He's one of the pioneers of the sport of trying to do this. This is something that not a lot of people have done. If they have done it, they've normally done it for selfish reasons, but his seemed pretty open-ended. So I just wish everyone out there all the best in the world. Any questions, you can contact me or Jerry. Thank you very much.
Well, we highly appreciate it, sir, because when it's all said and done, we do have just some of the historical artifacts that are being shared via YouTube and social media in general. And for those of you out there, if for some reason you find in your garage or in that closet you haven't been in, or the attic, or wherever it is, basement, you just might have some historical artifacts known as videotapes or even 8 millimeters that can be converted someday to what would be our history in this very diverse sport of whatever you want to call it, whether it's sniper, point karate, or what have you. So please, guys, share, because when it's all said and done, it's about us. That means U.S., all of us. We either benefit or suffer because of lack thereof information. So please share, guys. Mr. Longstreet, it's a sincere pleasure. Sir, the only thing I request is this. In the famous words of some crazy Puerto Rican from the Bronx, when I say A-B, sir, you reply, see ya. A-B?
See ya.
Thank you very much, sir. Highly appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you, Jerry. God bless you, too.